Leafs GM Brad Treliving breaks his silence and speaks with the media. Are we encouraged or confused by what he had to say today? Let's break it all down on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs-centered podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. What's happening, pal? How we feeling on a Friday?
No, I'm feeling pretty good. You know, we finally got to hear from the new head, I guess now the new head honcho, Brad Treliving.
Yeah, I guess technically he would be considered the new head honcho, and I guess now what I do know is like now, like for the first time, I guess there's pressure on Brad Treliving, right? Like the last couple of years, all that pressure has kind of been on Brendan Shanahan and the core four to make it work. And now, you know, based on what we heard today, it sounds as though change will be needed of some kind, and Brad Treliving, you know, really went into well, I wouldn't say went into detail, but he did note that he believes that the quote DNA of this team needs to change, and that was kind of the quote that really got a lot of runway with the media, and that we're going to kind of talk about here. Why don't we play the quote from Brad Treliving? This is from his introductory statement, his opening statement from his press conference earlier today, and he spoke on what he feels the team needs to do moving forward.
There's some DNA that has to change in our team. That's one thing that I found. If you keep getting to the same result, and that's not to dismiss a lot of the good that happened up into it, when you keep getting the same result, there's some DNA that needs to change. And so that's on me now going forward in our staff.
You want to continue it or?
No, that's good. I mean, that's really like the main crux of what I wanted to hear, what I thought was important from today's press conference was him talking about the fact that he believes that change is needed and they need to change the DNA of this group. Now, that's a little bit of a vague statement, you know, how you make that change. What is, you know, how do you do that? What strides are you going to make to change the DNA, I guess is now what Treliving has to figure out. I don't think he has those answers necessarily today, but how did you read into those comments initially, Dave?
I thought it kind of felt like a breath of fresh air, to be honest, right? It was that comment that there, you know, DNA needs to change, and we need championship teams know how to handle the moment, and the Leafs need to find a way to handle the moment because it's become pretty clear to Brad Treliving this team can't handle the high pressure moments. Like we've been saying it for a while, but to hear management say like this is for him to say we need to change the DNA, meaning the plan that was put in place here, because the DNA came from Brendan Shanahan. He's the one that instilled the DNA of this team with his vision. It needs to change. The change doesn't just happen by getting rid of the guy up top. It also means changing out his vision in a sense. We kind of said that this was going to be a part of it, but like to hear Treliving say it, but also to take the accountability to say it's on me now to do it. Not on the players necessarily. Yeah, sure, you're going to have to tell the players they got to play a certain way. And he did say that. We brought Craig in, trying to still a way that we need to play. But he then admits that's not enough.
Right.
I have to make change. Not the players got to do this, players got to do that. I need to go out and make a change. And that to me was, I know people are reading it, like they're really pushing on that, but like you have to understand that he is truly saying he has to go out and make that change. He can't expect the group to just figure it out.
Yeah, he believes it needs to be something, has to be done. Again, we talk about it year in, year out, right? The fact that this team for 9 straight years just kept going back at it with the same group. We can and we will, right? The core four, the Shannon plan, they doubled and tripled and quadrupled down on that group. And this was the first time in like 10 years that we have heard, wavering support on that group. I guess that's not true. Dubas somewhat had a little bit of waver in his final press conference as Maple Leafs GM, and he got fired a few days later. I'm not anticipating that to happen here to Brad Treliving, obviously, but it is nice to hear because a lot of the fan base is clamoring for change of some kind. And, I thought that another interesting moment or statement that he made, he was referring to, you said those big moments, those key moments. He called them critical moments. And he said, quote, "We have to figure out how to get better and more comfortable in the most critical moments of the hockey game." And, he alluded to game 5 and he alluded to game 7. And, he felt that things got really uncomfortable for the team when they allowed that first goal in game 7. And he said when they allowed that first goal, it was only 1-0, but he felt the team would looked as though they were down 4-0. Like that goal was such a backbreaker, and mentally they just kind of crumbled a little bit, and that's the type of critical moment that they need to be able to hunker down and not let that moment get to them, which is interesting because I did feel like in the Ottawa series, they did a really good job of coming up big in those critical moments, though. Like, how many times did we talk about the response goals from Toronto, right? Like, even in game 6, when they put away the Ottawa Senators, they gave up a tying goal in the third period. And then a few minutes later, Max Pacioretty with a big response takes the lead, right? Like, gets the lead back for Toronto. And it turned out to be the game winner. They didn't let that kind of sink them like we had seen in the past. But for whatever reason, when it comes to the Florida Panthers, and for years it was the Big Bad Bruins, now it's the pesky Panthers. It just seemed those the demons that run free in their heads, and it seems as though he's acknowledging that perhaps those demons aren't going to execute themselves. He's going to have to do it with some heavy work over the offseason, and it sounds like it probably is going to start with Mitch Marner departing the Toronto Maple Leafs. And that's another thing that I felt was kind of evident with what we heard here, that, he wasn't exactly adamant on saying whether or not he wanted to keep. He never said he was closing the door on Mitch Marner, but, talking about how the DNA needs to change and the fabric of the group needs to change. Well, that's one way to do it, because you talk about the DNA of this group. It's the core four. And the only way to change it is for one of those guys to depart. And again, the easiest path right now is most likely that being Mitch Marner.
Yeah. There's a part here, it didn't get into the clip because it got. I know that we were looking at clips, and that was the best one I could find. But there's a part that he said before. We have to continue to change and evolve our mindset. We have to find a way to create the team both between the years and personnel to be our very best at the most critical moments.
Right.
And to me, that felt like a bit of a message sending to the players on the team that in those critical moments haven't been able to get the job done. Mm-hmm. Like, to me, when the pressure was at an all-time high in game 7, what's the clip that's had been living on from days after that game? Mitch Marner, helmet off, yelling at the bench. Some people see that as fiery passion. Other people see it as a guy who in the moment got to him and he wasn't able to show that he was unraveled. He got unraveled. Things were unraveling, and the pressure was getting to him.
Yeah, you can look at it that. I don't necessarily look at that one. If we're talking about a critical moment where Marner had a lapse, to me, it was the neutral zone spinorama backhand sauce. That's the one that's going to live rent-free in my mind. I know that was game 5. Yeah. I know it was game 5, but that's one where it's a critical moment, right? In a game where you're starting to lose that momentum. The game was still in hand at that point. It was only 2-0 Florida, and then you make that boneheaded, idiotic play, and all of a sudden it's 3-0. The Leafs are completely dejected. Check, please. They go down 3-2. They've lost 3 straight games, and now all of a sudden your back's up against the wall and you're facing elimination. Like that's the critical moment for me in Game 5 where Mitch Marner failed to come up big. And again, you just look at Marner's stats over the course of the final 4 games of that series. He had just 1 assist. He was outscored 4-1 when out on the ice and had just 3 shots on goal. I get it. He's not Nylander. He's not Marner, or he's not Matthews, or he's not expected to be a goal scorer or a shooting threat, but you got to have more than 3 shots on net if you're out there playing more than 20 minutes a game. Yep. You just have to, right? And you look at the 6 Game 7s that he's played throughout his Maple Leafs career. They're 0-6 in those Game 7s. He has just 2 helpers in those outings. So again, those critical moments, those big time moments, he seems to fade. He's a great player. Don't get me wrong, terrific player all around. But when the moment calls for him to step up, he hasn't been able to do that in a Maple Leafs uniform. It's not to say that he won't do it elsewhere, right? We saw him do it in a Team Canada uniform at the Four Nations Championship, but for whatever reason, just can't get it done here in Toronto. And I'm getting more and more sure that is the change that will occur, a way to change the fabric and DNA of this group. He's been, part of the one of the faces of the franchise here for 9 years. I think him departing will certainly, allow this team to change up the fabric and change up how this group can look and play and feel moving forward.
Yeah, like I love how a lot of people are like, well, how do you go about changing the DNA? We take out the main part of your DNA. Like you change out the biggest part. We can say for sure Mitch Marner is a big part of this team's DNA. He has been. Like, is it a
worthwhile conversation to ask if that's enough though? Right, just taking one guy out of the equation, is that enough?
Definitely, it's definitely worthwhile, because you sometimes when something's broken, you change out one thing, but then guess what? More can be found after just changing one thing. Sometimes you really gotta deconstruct everything, look at the parts that are good and bad, and then start putting it back together. Like I think that's what when Treliving was also saying, like, we as a staff have to now go through all of it. Yeah, they're probably going through and saying, okay, it's probably not just Mitch Marner, because there was a lot of players that were, clearly Austin Matthews used the word passengers. They're probably going to look at that. Like, that's essentially what they're going to be doing. Who are the other?
Nylander didn't have a goal in the final 4 games. Yeah. Tavares didn't have a goal in the final 4 games. Like, it wasn't just Marner. We know that. Yeah. But that's the easy out, because he's the pending UFA. And it even, based on all the reports that we've heard from insiders, it appears that Marner's pretty well ready to move on and test the market as well. So, I thought that it was kind of interesting. Even when asked about it, though, Treliving, I thought he downplayed it a little bit, though. Like, he did come out when asked about Marner and said that it was an emotional exit meeting between him and Mitch. And I don't know what that tells me is Mitch probably said, like, I don't know if I want to be back, right? Like, that was fresh for him. And we've heard nothing of him committing to Toronto when he's spoken with the media. So I'd imagine when he's speaking with Treliving, he had the same message where he's just not sure, very non-committal. But as Tree said, it was an emotional meeting, and perhaps he's, I don't know, waiting for a change of heart for Mitch Marner. I'll be curious to see kind of how that whole thing plays out. But to me, yeah, if you're looking to make a sizable change and change the DNA of this group, the fabric of this group, I think moving on from Mitch Marner is pretty much where you got to start. And whether or not it takes more additional moves after that, we'll see. Does that mean it's Marner and Tavares? Perhaps. Like, is that what you have to do? I think that's possible. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back, continue to break down his comments, because he did have an interesting comment on John Tavares as well, which I want to get into, and some good praise for good old Matthew Knies. So we'll get to all that and more next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. The NHL playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. What players are showing up in the biggest moments, how you can track their trends, and help you build your next bet. How could a $200 bonus in bets add to the excitement if your first $5 bet wins? Well, go to FanDuel right now. Place a $5 bet. If that wins, you will get yourself $200 in bonus bets if you are new to FanDuel. So again, head to FanDuel.com, place your $5 bet. You'll get $200 in bonus bets if it wins. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every weekday. Free and available wherever you get a podcast. You can also find us up on YouTube as well. If you are an everydayer, thank you very much for coming back each and every day to listen to us two knuckleheads yammer on about the Maple Leafs. If you just happen to stumble upon us and you're enjoying the content, we do ask that, stick with us all summer long. We're going to be here each and every day throughout, the remainder of the playoffs and early into the off season. And we'll still keep getting episodes coming out to you through July and August as well. We're not going anywhere. Maple Leafs might be hitting the links, but we will not be here in the Locked On Leafs.
I'm going to be hitting the links, but also
all right. But we'll also be here too. All right, I get you. I hear it. Actually, apparently Nylander was back in Toronto up at TPC. I don't know if you saw that. He was hitting some balls today, and I think it was some like alumni pro-am. Yeah, well, it's next week, and I believe that they had like some Leafs alumni out there. Like I know O and Carlo were out there. I think Willie was also out there hitting some balls today at what's that, Osprey Valley? Is that where the Canadian Open's at? Yeah. So hey, Big Willie's in the city, so that's good to know. He went and won a bronze for Sweden at the Worlds, and then came back to Toronto. So just something, some food for thought there. Willie didn't come up at all in the Brett Treliving conversation. He spoke for about 50 minutes today to media, and not one person asked about Nylander. And not that I expected anyone to. Like, he's under contract, and there's a 0.001% chance that he's the change that Treliving decides to make. John Tavares, though, there was an interesting conversation there. When we had a chance to speak to Tavares, we as in Toronto, the media, it sounded as though Tavares was pretty certain that there was a mutual understanding that if he wanted to come back, there would be, he'd be able to come back. He'd be welcomed with open arms, almost as if the ink was drying on the contract. I don't know about you, but I'm less convinced of that based on what we heard from Brad Treliving today.
Well, I mean, he can't go out and say we're going to change. I think maybe there's two things there. Brad doesn't want to get too ahead of himself and say, yes, we want him back, or we're not too sure yet. I think there's part of that too. But at the same time, if you're going to go out and say you need to change the DNA of the team, but then you say you pretty much give the inclination from Tavares so you want him back. I think he has to play this smart. He can't guarantee anything for any of the free agents, because then if you're saying, yes, we like Tavares back, yes, we like Marner back, well, you just went on a pretty decent ramble saying you want to change the DNA of this team, but then you want to have the biggest part of that coming back. Like, I think he's trying to not contradict himself and not put his foot in his mouth a little bit and saying that, yeah, we want to have these guys. I mean, he would love to have them, but he can't guarantee anything, because the other thing too is both those guys have the ability to walk. Both those guys could at the end of the day say, you know what, as much as we like what you're offering, we're not entirely sold. We're going to go elsewhere. Like, that can happen too. So I think Treliving is, he said he had good discussions, but those discussions can take a different turn if Treliving offers something and Tavares is like, oh, well, that's what you're offering me. I thought maybe I was going to be getting this.
Well, nothing's been offered yet. Nothing's been accepted yet, right? We haven't heard anything about an extension. You know, it's been a week. It's been 11 days since the Leafs were eliminated. If there was an offer on the table and an extension in place, I'm sure it would have been signed, sealed, and delivered by now so that they could put that piece of work to the side. But, you know, when asked today about the future of both Marner and Tavares specifically, you know, instead of saying we'd like him back and we hope to have good progressive conversations, it was more of a, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We're going to speak with our pro scouts and we'll see. So again, to me, it just sounds he isn't as gung ho about bringing Tavares back as Tavares was about returning to Toronto. And is that maybe Treliving's way of negotiating, basically trying to make it seem to John that he's not going to be a priority, and if he wants to return, he can, but it's got to be on his terms, and that would be at a very low number.
I think that's it too. You kind of have to make it seem as if you're not putting all the chips in Tavares's, you know, on Tavares's side. You can't be like, oh yeah, we definitely want John Tavares back. We like the worst thing that can happen is if we lose John Tavares. Well, Treliving can't say that. He can't make Tavares feel like, well, if these guys lose me, they are screwed. So I can really, really twist the knife and make sure that, yeah, I'll take a discount, but don't think I'm going to be like, there's a bit of a negotiation tactic here too, right? Because the agent can come around and be like, you're only offering us $3 million a year. I'm not saying that's what they're going to offer, but like, he's in like, but I thought you really liked this player, right?
I could see that being the case. Like, I mean, that's pretty much what happened with Stamkos, right?
Yep.
I could see that happening the exact same way, but at least Stamkos delivered a couple cups and 3 trips to a Stanley Cup final in his tenure in
this is true. I followed that Stamkos up very heavily. What the difference to me with Stamkos is he was pissed that he didn't get offered a contract going into that season. He wanted it. He wants to stay in Tampa. We knew that. And he wanted it to be done just like every other free agent that they signed. Get it well.
Do we know if there was an offer made to John ahead of the season? I don't know if we know that or not.
Oh man, I can't even remember.
Like it could be the same scenario here, Dave. Like
but
Tavares probably does want to return and wanted to return last summer. Would have opened up conversations at an extension. Those conversations may just have not happened. I'm not saying they didn't, but I don't recall there being, you know, conversations of it happening though.
Yeah, I don't either. This is where I should have asked one of our insider friends if they had anything on that, but I don't remember hearing any like potential offer. And look, that's something. Maybe this is Tavares when he constantly says I want to be back. Maybe this is him trying to drum up something from the Leafs to say, okay, I want to be back. Let's work something out here. I mean, I totally get that. I still think the one reason why I kind of said yes, the only reason why I have a good feeling of Tavares coming back is that when you lose Tavares, you got to replace Tavares. And like, look at the options out there. It's not just
the same thing about Marner, though. Like you lose Marner, you gotta replace. Like it's the exact same scenario, Dave.
I know, but we also
Marner's harder to replace. Like let's be honest, Marner's a harder player to replace than
the 100-point player.
Year-old John Tavares, who's probably not your number 2 center moving forward.
Most likely.
Maybe he's got one more year in that role, and then after that, the wheels could fall off.
That's true, but you're also looking at the center market versus the winger market. Always more wingers and different types of wingers. Again, we're talking about changing the DNA here. If you're going to let a 100-point player Marner go, your desire is to now bring in something different. Not replacing Marner. Like they're not going to replace Marner. We said that. But that's not what they're trying to do.
No.
They're trying to do something different. Is Tavares good or bad for the DNA? I think that's the other thing that they have to decide.
Of course. They should, but that's the weird part about all this is that like it's a bit of an oxymoron, isn't it?
Yeah.
Both of these players actually do fit the type of player you want, right?
Yeah.
True 200-foot players who, are local homegrown assets to your team. But unfortunately, a shoe has to drop somewhere.
Mhm.
And these guys' contracts happen to be up, and it's just the easiest way to go about making that change to the DNA. I don't know. I'm less sold on Tavares coming back. Not that I'm more sold on Marner returning. I guess what I'm saying is I think that there's probably a higher percentage chance that both aren't back compared to where I was at yesterday prior to listening to Treliving.
Yeah, I just think he can't obviously. Treliving has gotten to the point where he can't give out any guarantees because he's been burned. He's been through this before with having a player that, I mean, maybe it might be different in Gaudreau's case.
I just don't see how you could possibly change the DNA with bringing these guys back. Like, ultimately, that's what I believe. And he even said, like, the first statement there that he made with the clip we played, he essentially came out and said, well, let me see if I can find it. I'm pretty sure I wrote it down here. But he, for lack of a better words, kind of paraphrasing here, when you do the same thing year in, year out with the same results, you got to change something. And this is, they believe that they need to change the DNA of the group. And the only way to do that, the DNA is the core four. So unless you make a change there, you're not going to change the DNA of this group. It's just not going to happen, right? They've tried multiple times to get this group to buy in to playing, more of an assertive, more of a, to buy into that killer instinct. It hasn't happened. It hasn't gotten here, right? It's not there. And it's not going to randomly appear. So the only way to do that is to bring it in externally. And the only way you can make that happen is if you create the cap space, you create the roster space for that to happen. And that may require both of those guys walking out the door to make it happen.
The one thing I also, though, when we're talking about the core, right? Tavares at a lower number I think changes his status a bit too, right? You're not paying, he's not a $10+ million player anymore.
Right.
Marner would be.
Yes.
That's the change. That's what differs Tavares and Marner for me, is that Tavares knows his role changes.
Right.
Marner doesn't.
No.
Right. And that's the one thing that makes it different from Tavares and Marner for me. Now, look, I think everyone has to understand that with this change, you have to be open to a lot of things changing. Like, don't have the mindset that all these guys are coming back. Well, the guys that are free agents coming back, right? That's going to be the nature of, like, if you are in the boat of, this thing needs to, like, they really need to change things. Don't be pissed off when those guys are gone, because that's what it does come down to. Don't be surprised if that's what the team decides to do.
If you asked both, probably Craig Berube and Brad Treliving, if you could take a DNA strand of any player in your lineup right now and clone them to get you more of those guys, who do you think that would be?
Oh, it's going to be Matthew Knies.
Right.
It's clearly, I mean, he is also the youngest player on your team, so he's fresh to this. He is, out of all the players that are part of this core, he's the least integrated part of the DNA because he hasn't been here as long. Yeah.
I mean, the first year he came, they won a round. So he didn't experience that, first round rut. And then last year, went to game 7. He got hurt, so he wasn't really able to play. And then this year they make it through the first round, and he's been a performer. He's been a playoff player for them. And there was a lot of praise of Matthew Knies today also. That was another thing, another big takeaway for me. Brad Treliving calling Matthew Knies, talking about him elevating from a role player to an important player to a core player of this team, and how he will be a priority moving forward. Tomorrow, or on Monday rather, when we come back and reconvene for another episode of the podcast, I've got a perfect contract comparable for Matthew Knies, by the way. So I want to get into that on Monday. So kind of write that down and remind me for that conversation on Monday. But on the other side, Dave, we're finally going to get to it, because now we talk about, right, changing the fabric, changing the DNA of this group. what players out there are available to make that happen. And there is one specific player that has been linked to Toronto that does kind of fit the bill for what Treliving will be looking for to inject into this lineup and change up the mix here with the Maple Leafs moving forward. So we'll tell you who that player and some potential other players could be next here in the Locked On Leafs podcast. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti. We're reacting to Brad Treliving and his end of season press conference today. Came a little later than I think a lot of people were anticipating. He was busy. Family matters, Dave. Family matters. He had his daughter's graduation, and family first, of course. Family first, so it's okay. I think it also gave everyone a chance to kind of take a breath a little bit. And I think it kind of helped when it was a very civil conversation with the media and Brad Treliving today when they spoke. But again, talking about how this team needs to change their DNA and they need to improve in those critical moments, right? Talks about how champions are calm in those critical moments. And there's a champion out there who is a pending UFA who is very calm in those moments and often, creates the bleep storm for the opposition in those moments. Sam Bennett, who is a player that has been linked to the Maple Leafs as a possible, not necessarily a Marner replacement, but someone who they could bring in as part of the package to try and replace a Mitch Marner. And that's the type of DNA I think that Brad Treliving would love to acquire and put into this lineup.
Oh, 1,000%. Because, the regular season, he hasn't exactly lit the lamp as, some of the other players on the team. But that's exactly what this team has been trying to do. They've been trying to find the guys that when the pressure's high, they perform. Look at the last two playoffs for them and have the stats. 16 points in 17 games this year so far. Last year when they won the Cup, 14 points in 19 games, playing 20 minutes and 52 seconds a night, by the way. And then the year before that, the first time it's actually in the second season in Florida, 3 points in 10 games. He's developed into that. Didn't happen right away from him. The last three playoff runs, all the ones where they've gone to the Cup final, he has been right in there as one of their top guys.
Yeah, he's now played over 100 games of playoff hockey in his career and is now making his third straight trip to a Stanley Cup final. And the way he plays is exactly what you need. That is a guy who plays with edge, killer instinct, and there's just a I don't give a bleep meter that is off the charts with this guy. And this is the type of player that shines in the postseason, right? Like you just talked about the stats there for this player. And this is someone who only for the first time in his career, Dave, this year, did he finally top the 50-point mark in the regular season. Had a career high 51 points this year. Yet you look at when the chips are down in the postseason, he's one of the most impactful players in the last 3 years. So it's interesting. It is hard to kind of conjure up in your head. Are we really going to pay a 51-point guy $10 million? Is that really what the Maple Leafs are about to do? $9-10 million bucks, whatever it takes to land a Sam Bennett. But then you just have to think, well, look what he does in the postseason. And that's what makes or could make it worth it. Does it turn out that way? Not always, but that at least will be the thought process if they do pursue a Sam Bennett. And I saw John Shannon was on the Sakaris and Price show out in Vancouver a couple days ago and did acknowledge, in his opinion, that Sam Bennett's going to be playing in one of two places next year. It's either going to be in Florida, Sunrise, Florida, once again for the Panthers, sign a long-term deal to stay there and maybe be a lifer in Florida, or he might come home to Toronto and be part of the change here for the Maple Leafs. So we'll see if Sam Bennett could be part of the fix here in Toronto if he does hit the market, and how aggressively the Maple Leafs pursue him There's a couple other names that are really interesting to me too, and we'll dive deeper into all of this in free agency and the available targets and options for the Maple Leafs over the course of the next few weeks, month, really, as we head into July 1st. But if you take a peek, there's a lot of yeah, like veteran guys who have that type of DNA that you would love to bring in. And, Jonathan Toews today, I don't know if you saw, told his agency that he wants to play hockey next year. He feels 100% healthy and he's ready to come back to the NHL. And that's you talk about a winning DNA. I mean, Captain Serious, Jonathan Toews, one of the youngest captains to win a Stanley Cup, and he's got a gold medal. Like he's clearly not the player he used to be. He's not going to be a top line, contributor for Toronto, obviously. But you talk about wanting to change the mindset between the ears and change the DNA. Like that's a player that I think the Leafs should have significant interest in if he does indeed make his way back to the NHL.
He specifically said he's not doing this. But part of it was his last year in Chicago went so miserably for him because of his health issues.
Yeah.
But he says he has a lot left. Like he went out, he got himself to the point where he feels like he is ready to play again, and he wants to show that he still is the player that he thinks he can be. Maybe not to the degree he was when they were, in those dynasty years, but still very much capable of helping a team get over the hump. Well, gee, which team has really needed to get over the hump more than the Leafs? If you want to prove people, what better way to do it than doing it in Toronto? And
his hometown Winnipeg Jets may put their hand up there, though. I will say,
yeah, that's true. But it's Winnipeg. That's true. I get that one. I get that sentiment. For some guys, Winnipeg is home, but sometimes it isn't really seen as home, as I've heard from people before. There could be that. But I thought about a crazy potential proposition here.
Both of them? Both of them, Dave? Are you thinking about both of them?
Can they do a little Chicago Blackhawks reunion in Toronto? If you want to go out and get a guy who, when the pressure's at his highest, shines.
Showtime.
Go get me a Patrick Kane. Like, why not? I understand that he is not the player he was in Chicago. I understand that. But what I saw from him in Detroit, this is still a player that can produce. Even if it's in a lower role. But I mean, you can't tell me he wouldn't like the opportunity to play with a player like Austin Matthews potentially.
And when he was originally deciding if he was going to accept the trade from Chicago a couple of years ago, the Leafs, one of the teams that he reportedly was interested in joining, to have that reunion, to play with an Austin Matthews. So it would be interesting. He's from Buffalo, so it's not too far from his home team, his hometown. So it's an opportunity for maybe some friends and family to come and watch him play on a nightly basis. Quick jaunt up to QEW for an hour and a half. So that's another interesting player. But yeah, if you could do a little Chicago reunion, which is hilarious because way back when, I remember Mike Babcock looked at Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews and said, like, these guys can be the next Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. Like, that's what we're trying to build here, is that Chicago dynasty, and it's around those two players. And it would be kind of funny if all the failures led to them just going out and ultimately getting Toews and Kane years later. That's just the Toronto way, though. That's just the Toronto way, because it did the same thing. Owen Nolan came late in his career. Brian Leetch came late in his career. They went out and they got Eric Lindros late in his career. Joe Thornton, Patrick Marleau. There's a lot of guys who they decided to go out and get late in their careers and not in their primes. But at least, they would be very well insulated with, the superstars of Austin Matthews and William Nylander and now Matthew Knies and, Easton Cowan might make an appearance with this team next year. And we'll see what else they can end up doing with the allotted cap space that would be available if they do, in fact, move on from Mitch Marner and or John Tavares. But that would be a very intriguing reunion if you can get those Chicago boys together here in Toronto. That's the type of winning DNA that I think Leafs Nation would love to see injected into this lineup. But we'll see. We'll explore those options and many more as the weeks ahead, as we get to free agency. So we'll leave the conversation there for now. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys on Monday. Enjoy the games this weekend. Until then, keep locked right here on Locked On Leafs.